What would you do if the man who vowed forever left you to die while holding another woman's hand? Stay with me. Trust me, this story will touch your soul. Like, share, and subscribe. The church bells rang with a sound that could split hearts in half. It was supposed to be a melody of joy, but to anyone who knew the truth, it was a cruel betrayal wrapped in gold and silk. Inside the grand cathedral of St. Raphael's, the air was thick with the perfume of roses, lilies, and the scent of wealth. Rows of glittering chandeliers poured warm light down upon an audience of the city's most powerful people. Cameras flashed like lightning, capturing every detail of the millionaire CEO's perfect wedding. Edward Langston stood at the altar, tall, handsome, dressed in a custom-tailored tuxedo. He carried himself with the smug pride of a man who believed the world belonged to him. His hand was linked with that of Vanessa Cruz, a glamorous woman 10 years younger, a socialite with a smile that screamed victory. Today, she wasn't just becoming his bride, she was stepping into a throne of power, wealth, and status. The guests whispered their envy. "She caught the richest man in the city," one woman murmured. "And his poor wife? Well, I heard she's gone for good." But across town, in the stark, sterile halls of St. Mary's Hospital, the truth was unfolding in silence and pain. Lila Langston, Edward's legal wife, was fighting for her life. Her fragile body trembled on the delivery bed as sweat poured down her pale face. She was only 26, her belly swollen beyond belief, carrying not one, not two, but 3 babies, triplets. Her lips whispered prayers between screams, clinging to hope that someone, anyone, might stand by her side. But the chair next to her bed was empty. The man who had vowed to love her in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, was miles away, smiling for photographers as he slipped a ring on another woman's finger. The nurses rushed around her, voices urgent. "She's losing too much blood. We need the doctor now." Lila's vision blurred, but in her fading strength, she thought of her unborn children. She remembered how Edward once placed his hand on her stomach, promising they would raise a family together. That memory now felt like poison. Her breaths grew shallow, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. Back at the cathedral, the priest's voice echoed. "Do you, Edward Langston, take Vanessa Cruz to be your lawful wedded wife?" Edward's lips curled into a proud smile. "I do." The applause thundered, champagne glasses clinked, and the organ played triumphantly. But no one in that grand room knew that his real wife, the mother of his children, was gasping for air in a hospital bed. The irony was unbearable. Lila was not only fighting for her own life, but for the survival of the 3 tiny souls within her. With every contraction, pain ripped through her body like fire. She squeezed the bedsheet, her knuckles white, whispering names she had already chosen for her babies. "Stay with me," she begged in a broken voice. "Please, my little ones, stay with me." The doctor finally rushed in, his expression grim. "She's critical. If we don't act now, we'll lose her and the babies." At the very same moment, Edward and Vanessa kissed in front of hundreds of flashing cameras. His hand held hers high, like a trophy, while journalists captured the image that would soon make headlines. Millionaire CEO marries stunning socialite in wedding of the year. But headlines can never tell the whole story. As the wedding party moved toward the ballroom for the extravagant reception, caviar, champagne fountains, and a 10-tier cake, Lila's heartbeat on the hospital monitor faltered. The beeping grew irregular, every second louder than the cheers echoing in the cathedral. Her mind drifted to the night Edward abandoned her. She had begged him not to leave, begged him to remember the vows they once shared. He had laughed coldly, saying, "You're nothing but a burden now. Vanessa is the future. You're the past." Those words sliced her soul open, and now, on the brink of death, they replayed in her ears like a cruel anthem. "Doctor, we're losing her," a nurse cried. The machines screamed their warning. The doctor barked orders. Nurses rushed with surgical tools, and the room descended into chaos. Lila's world slipped into darkness. At the reception hall, Edward raised his champagne glass, his eyes glinting with arrogance. "To new beginnings," he declared. The crowd erupted with cheers. But destiny has a way of writing its own vows, stronger than any man's betrayal. Just as the first toast ended, a hospital intern, trembling with urgency, pushed open the cathedral doors. His clothes were wrinkled, his breath short, but his voice carried across the hall. "Mr. Langston," he shouted, "it's your wife. She's dying in labor." The room fell into stunned silence. Vanessa's smile froze. Edward's glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the marble floor. Gasps rippled through the crowd as whispers turned into a storm. And in that single moment, the fairy tale wedding cracked open, revealing the ugly truth Edward had tried to bury. Long before she was gasping for life in a hospital bed, Leila Martinez had been just another ordinary girl with extraordinary dreams. She grew up in a small town on the outskirts of Houston, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a diner. Their apartment was tiny, the wallpaper peeling, the fridge often empty. But what the house lacked in wealth, it overflowed with love. Her mother, Elena, was the anchor of her world. She taught Lila that dignity wasn't about riches, but about the way one carried herself in moments of hardship. Every evening, even after 12-hour shifts, Elena would braid Lila's hair, kiss her forehead and whisper, "You are worth more than gold, my little star. One day, the world will know your light." Lila carried those words with her, even as life tested her resolve. She excelled in school, not because the path was easy, but because she refused to surrender. She dreamed of becoming a teacher, of shaping young minds the way her mother had shaped hers. But when her mother passed away suddenly from a heart attack, those dreams seemed to collapse into dust. At only 19, Lila was alone in the world, clinging to survival more than ambition. It was during one of her lowest moments that she met Edward Langston. He wasn't the millionaire CEO he would later become. Back then, he was a rising businessman, still carving his empire. Lila was working as a waitress, exhausted and invisible to most of the customers, but not to him. Edward saw her struggling with a tray of drinks, rushing between tables with sweat dampening her forehead. He flashed that charming smile that could melt anyone's defenses and left her a tip big enough to cover her week's rent. Their eyes met. For the first time since her mother's death, Lila felt noticed. Edward courted her with a persistence that overwhelmed her defenses. Flowers arrived at the diner. Expensive dresses appeared at her apartment door. He spoke of a future filled with love, security, and dreams she never dared to imagine. To a girl who had lost everything, Edward seemed like salvation. Within a year, she was his wife. For a while, life truly did feel like a fairy tale. They lived in a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city's skyline. He took her to charity galas, dressed her in gowns that shimmered under chandeliers, and whispered promises of forever in her ear. She believed every word. But fairy tales, as Lila would learn, often come with hidden monsters. As Edward's empire grew, so did the distance between them. Board meetings replaced date nights. Business trips replaced family dinners. Lila, now in her early 20s, found herself spending long nights alone in a mansion that felt more like a prison. When she told Edward she wanted to continue her studies and become a teacher, his response chilled her. "Why would you need to work?" he scoffed. "Your job is to look perfect, host dinners, and give me heirs. Leave the real achievements to me." Her heart sank, but she swallowed her pain. She reminded herself of her mother's words. Dignity was how you carried yourself in hardship. And so she smiled, nodded, and pretended the emptiness didn't hurt. The only light in her loneliness came when she discovered she was pregnant. She thought it would be the miracle that bound them again. Edward seemed thrilled at first. He touched her belly, spoke of building nurseries, and promised he would slow down to be there. For a brief time, Lila felt like they were a family again. But then came the news. Not one baby, not two, but 3. Triplets. The doctors warned her it would be a dangerous pregnancy. Lila's body was small and fragile. Carrying 3 children was a risk that could cost her life. But she refused to give up. She wanted these babies with every beat of her heart. She wanted to give them the love she had lost when her mother died. Edward's reaction was colder. At first, he pretended to be supportive, but she saw the worry in his eyes. Not worry for her, but for his reputation, his schedule, his perfect life. As her belly grew, so did his impatience. He stopped accompanying her to doctor's visits. He started staying out late. The scent of unfamiliar perfume clung to his suits. The whispers reached her soon after. Edward was seen dining with Vanessa Cruz, a socialite known for climbing her way into the arms of wealthy men. At first, Lila didn't believe it. She told herself her husband loved her, that the man who once left roses at her door couldn't possibly betray her now. But the truth became undeniable. One evening, Lila walked into Edward's study, only to find a velvet jewelry box left carelessly on his desk. Inside was an engagement ring, not hers, not something she had ever seen before. Her hands shook as she realized what it meant. When she confronted him, his mask of charm dropped. He sneered. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Lila. Vanessa is my future. You're nothing but a tired little girl with too many babies." Her world shattered. She wanted to scream, to remind him of their vows, of the nights he had sworn she was his only love. But the words froze in her throat. She was 6 months pregnant with triplets, her body swollen and weak. She had no family to turn to, no one who would stand on her side. She was trapped. From that night, Edward's cruelty sharpened. He stopped hiding Vanessa. He paraded her at public events, allowed the tabloids to speculate, and left Lila humiliated in the shadows. But still, Lila endured. She endured for the 3 tiny heartbeats inside her. And now, in that hospital room, her endurance was being tested to its breaking point. Each contraction felt like her body was splitting in half. She clung to the memory of her mother's voice, whispering, "You are worth more than gold." The machines beeped louder. The doctor's voice grew urgent. "We're losing her." Somewhere in the fog of her pain, Lila heard a nurse's voice. "Should we call her husband?" The doctor's reply was like ice. "Forget the husband. He's at his wedding with another woman." And with those words, the last fragile thread of hope inside Lila snapped as the room plunged into chaos. The city that night was split in 2 worlds. One glittered beneath chandeliers and champagne fountains. The other reeked of antiseptic and echoed with the beeping of machines. Between those 2 worlds lay the heart of betrayal, beating like a drum no one could ignore. At the Langston wedding, wealth dripped from every corner. The ballroom of the St. Raphael Grand Hotel had been transformed into a palace. Velvet curtains cascaded from ceilings 3 stories high. Golden chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, scattering light onto tables dressed in white silk. Waiters in crisp uniforms balanced trays of caviar and Dom Perignon, weaving between the city's elite. The air buzzed with gossip, envy, and laughter, too loud to be genuine. Vanessa Cruz was the star of the evening. She glowed in her custom Verawang gown, every stitch tailored to perfection. Diamonds the size of raindrops glittered on her neck. As she floated across the floor on Edward's arm, guests whispered in admiration. "She's breathtaking," someone sighed. Another chuckled. She knew exactly what she was doing. Poor first wife never stood a chance. No one dared speak Lila's name. It was as if she had already been erased from the story. Meanwhile, just 6 miles away, the hospital walls rattled with a different music. The shrill alarm of monitors, the frantic shuffle of nurses, and the low groans of a woman losing her battle against pain. Lila's room was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights flickering as if mocking her struggle. Sweat soaked her gown, her hair clung to her temples, and her breaths came in ragged gasps. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the metallic tang of blood in the air. Every contraction tore her apart. The nurse wiped her forehead gently. "Stay with us, honey. Stay with us for your babies." Lila wanted to answer, but her voice cracked into a whisper. "Edward, where is he?" The nurse's silence was louder than words. Back at the wedding, Edward Langston held court like a king among pawns. His tuxedo was flawless, his smile calculated. Reporters snapped photos, their flashes lighting his arrogance. Every article would crown him the city's most powerful bachelor turned groom of the year. He basked in it, each compliment feeding his ego. At the head table, Vanessa leaned close, her perfume sweet and intoxicating. "You finally buried your past," she purred. "From this day, it's just you and me." Edward raised his glass. "To the future," he declared. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter rose like thunder, and the orchestra swelled with music. But destiny has a way of mocking even the proudest men. Because across town, Lila's doctor barked an order. "We're prepping for an emergency C-section. She's hemorrhaging." The words pierced the sterile air like knives. Nurses scrambled, wheeling in equipment. The monitor beside her beeped erratically, the line of her life zigzagging closer to disaster. Lila clutched a nurse's hand, her eyes wide with terror. "Please," she gasped, "don't let my babies die." Her voice was raw, broken, but filled with the strength of a mother's love. As she was rushed toward the operating room, her mind drifted. She remembered her first dance with Edward at their wedding years ago. when his eyes had glistened with promises of forever. She had believed him then, believed that love could heal all wounds. Now, he was spinning another woman around a ballroom while she bled out on a hospital bed. The contrast was cruel, almost too much for the heavens to allow. At the hotel, the wedding cake towered like a monument to excess, 10 tiers of sugar and gold leaf, topped with figurines of a bride and groom who were nothing more than lies carved into sweetness. Guests lined up with their phones, recording every decadent detail. One guest whispered, "It's the wedding of the decade." Another muttered, "Strange though, isn't it? His first wife only disappeared a few months ago. Almost too convenient." But their murmurs were drowned in music, swallowed by the orchestra's triumphant notes. At the hospital there was no music, no applause, only the deafening silence of fear. The doctor's gloved hands worked quickly, cutting through layers with precision. Lila's body trembled under anesthesia, her lips moving silently in prayer. "Mama, help me," she whispered, as if calling to the mother she lost years ago. The first cry of a baby pierced the room, then a second, then a third. Tiny, fragile voices filled the sterile air, proof that miracles could be born even in the shadow of death. Nurses rushed to cradle the infants, wrapping them in warm blankets. "2 girls and a boy," one announced softly. "They're alive." But their mother's pulse was fading. "Her blood pressure's crashing," the doctor shouted. "We're losing her." The nurses scrambled, pushing fluids, trying to stop the bleeding. The babies wailed as if calling for the mother, slipping away from them. Back at the wedding, Edward lifted Vanessa in a dramatic spin on the dance floor, the crowd cheering. Flashbulbs froze the moment in golden light. His arrogance blinded him to the storm brewing beyond those marble walls. And then, just as he dipped Vanessa for a kiss, the cathedral doors burst open. A hospital intern stood there, disheveled, his scrubs stained, his breath ragged. His voice rang through the hall, slicing the music in two. "Mr. Langston, your wife, she's dying in labor." The ballroom fell into stunned silence. Vanessa's painted smile faltered. Edward's hand slipped, his face draining of color. Guests gasped, whispers rising like wildfire. The orchestra froze mid-note, the champagne glasses stilled in midair. And in that grand, glittering hall, Edward Langston realized that the 2 worlds he had tried to keep apart, one of gold and one of blood, were colliding. And as he turned toward the doors, he had no idea that what awaited him would destroy everything he thought he controlled. Edward Langston had always been a man who thrived on control. From the moment he clawed his way out of a modest upbringing, he vowed he would never again feel small, powerless, or ignored. He built his empire brick by brick, deal by deal, crushing competitors with a ruthless smile. People admired his brilliance, but they feared his ambition more. And for Edward, fear was more intoxicating than love. When he first met Lila, she had been soft, gentle, the kind of woman who believed in forever. At that stage of his life, Edward wanted stability, a quiet partner who would make him look respectable. Lila was perfect for that role. She adored him, obeyed him, and asked for nothing but his attention. But as the years passed, her devotion became a mirror he didn't want to face. She reminded him of promises he no longer intended to keep. To Edward, she was a burden, a relic of his early climb. Vanessa Cruz was the opposite. She was fire wrapped in silk, ambition painted across red lips. Where Lila was modest, Vanessa was bold. Where Lila sacrificed, Vanessa demanded. She didn't beg for Edward's attention, she made him chase her, using every glance and laugh as bait. Their affair began at a charity gala. Lila had been pregnant with the triplets, quietly excusing herself from the crowd to rest. Edward remained, his eyes drawn to Vanessa across the room. She knew exactly what she was doing, leaning close to influential men, whispering in their ears with a laugh that lingered too long. When Edward introduced himself, she pretended indifference, the oldest trick in the book. "You're just another CEO," she said with a smirk. "Convince me why I should care." For the first time in years, Edward felt challenged. And Edward loved nothing more than conquest. Soon, Vanessa was everywhere. On his arm at business dinners, in his car late at night, in his penthouse when Lila was left alone. She became his confidant, his partner in schemes, the one who fed his ego with sweet poison. "You deserve more than a tired wife and screaming children," she told him one night, her fingers trailing his jawline. "You deserve me. Together, we'll own this city." It didn't take long for Edward to believe her. He stopped coming home. He stopped pretending. When tabloids whispered about the affair, Edward didn't silence them. He fed them. He wanted the world to see Vanessa as his, wanted Lila to feel erased. Vanessa reveled in the humiliation she orchestrated. One afternoon, she deliberately wore Edward's jacket, the one Lila had gifted him years ago, and flaunted it at a charity luncheon. The photographers caught every angle. The next morning, magazines splashed the photo across their covers with the headline, "The New Queen Beside the King." Lila saw the image in the hospital waiting room. Her heart cracked, but she said nothing. She had learned that her silence was Edward's expectation. Still, the pain carved deeper lines into her fragile body. Edward, meanwhile, crafted a narrative to justify his betrayal. "Lila isn't strong enough for my world," he told colleagues, dismissing her as if she were a failed investment. "She's fragile, unambitious. Vanessa understands me. She's my equal." The cruelty wasn't just in what he said, but in how he displayed it. At board meetings, he invited Vanessa to sit beside him in the chair Lila once occupied. At galas, he introduced her as the woman who makes my life worth living. Every gesture was calculated, every word a dagger aimed at Lila's heart. Vanessa played her role to perfection. She whispered in his ear during speeches, laughed at his jokes louder than anyone else, and touched his arm at every opportunity. She didn't just want his wealth, she wanted to wear his name like a crown. And she wanted Lila to watch from the shadows. Powerless, yet beneath her flawless makeup and rehearsed charm, Vanessa was terrified. She knew Edward's loyalty was fickle. He had traded one wife for her. What would stop him from trading her for someone younger, richer, or more useful? That fear made her dangerous. She clung to Edward not out of love, but out of desperation to secure her place before he could discard her too. The night of the wedding was supposed to be her victory. The ballroom sparkled, the cameras flashed, and she glided like royalty. She told herself she had won. But when the hospital intern burst through the doors with the news of Lila's labor, her triumph cracked. She saw the flicker of panic in Edward's eyes and hated it. "She's nothing," Vanessa hissed under her breath as whispers rippled through the guests. "Don't you dare run to her. This is our night." But Edward wasn't listening. His mind raced with the realization that the woman he had abandoned was carrying not just one child but 3, triplets, a legacy far greater than he had ever imagined. If Lila died, he would still inherit heirs. If she lived, she would forever tie him to her. Either way, Vanessa's victory wasn't as secure as she thought. Vanessa grabbed his arm, nails digging into his sleeve. "Stay here. If you walk out that door, they'll all see you for what you are." Weak. Edward's jaw tightened. Cameras were still flashing, guests still staring. His empire was built on appearances, and right now, appearances demanded that he look unshaken. So he forced a smile, raised his champagne glass, and said loudly, "Ignore the distraction. Tonight is about love." The orchestra resumed, the crowd hesitated, and Vanessa plastered her smile back on. But the damage was done. Behind those glittering eyes, Edward was calculating, and Vanessa knew it. Across town, in the operating room, Lila's heart faltered. Doctors fought to keep her alive, her babies crying in the nursery as if calling her back. At the wedding, Vanessa leaned close, her whisper dripping with venom. "She'll die, Edward. She'll die, and then you'll finally be free. Don't look so worried. Isn't this what you wanted?" But Edward's eyes betrayed him, because for the first time in his life, he realized the one woman he had discarded might be the only person capable of destroying him. The moment the hospital intern's voice echoed across the ballroom, the air in the St. Raphael Grand Hotel shifted. It was as if every chandelier had dimmed, every violin string had snapped. The words, "Your wife is dying in labor," hung in the air like poison. Edward froze. His champagne glass shattered at his feet. Vanessa clutched his arm, her nails biting into his sleeve, forcing her smile back into place for the cameras, but the whispers had already begun. "Wife? Did he just say wife?" a guest muttered, eyes wide. "Isn't Vanessa supposed to be his first?" another gasped. "No. The first wife? She's still alive?" The ballroom became a hive of speculation, the hum of gossip louder than the orchestra. Reporters, hungry for scandal, raised their cameras higher, snapping pictures with renewed frenzy. For years, Edward had carefully crafted the image of a powerful, flawless man. But now the cracks were visible for all to see. On the other side of town, the hospital was chaos. Lila lay unconscious, her breathing shallow, her face pale as wax. The triplets, two tiny girls and one fragile boy, were in incubators, their cries muffled by glass walls. Nurses rushed around, voices clipped, hearts heavy. "She's bleeding out. We need more units of blood. Keep pressure. Don't let her slip." The contrast was cruel. In the hospital, life and death wrestled in silence. In the ballroom, wealth and vanity tried desperately to drown out the truth. Edward cleared his throat, trying to salvage control. "Ignore this interruption," he said, his voice tight but loud enough to carry. "My first wife is no longer part of my life. Tonight we celebrate love and—" But the crowd wasn't convinced. Murmurs grew louder, sharper. A woman at the front shook her head. "No longer part of your life? She's carrying your children? And you're here, marrying someone else?" Another voice rose from the back. "Is this true, Edward? Did you abandon your wife while she's giving birth?" The question stabbed deeper than any blade. Edward's smile faltered. For the first time in years, he looked cornered. Vanessa, sensing the shift, tightened her grip. She leaned close, whispering through clenched teeth, "Smile. Don't let them see you panic. This is our night." But her words only fueled the fire. Cameras flashed faster. Guests reached for their phones, already typing messages that would spread across social media before the cake was even cut. #CEO with Mistress, wife dying alone, triplet scandal. The hashtags would trend before midnight. Meanwhile, at the hospital, a young nurse named Clara pressed a damp cloth to Lila's forehead, her eyes brimming with tears. "Hold on, sweetheart. Your babies need you. Don't leave them." Lila's lips moved faintly, forming words no one could hear. A prayer, a plea, maybe a goodbye. Clara squeezed her hand tighter. "Fight. Please fight." Back at the wedding, Edward raised his voice again. "My personal life is none of your concern. Tonight is about me and Vanessa. End of story." But the crowd wasn't satisfied. A man in a navy suit, an old investor with deep pockets, stood up. His voice boomed across the room. "End of story? Not for your shareholders, Edward. If this scandal hits the papers, your empire will crash. No man can run a company while the world calls him a cheat who left his pregnant wife to die." The words struck harder than a physical blow. Edward's empire wasn't just built on money. It was built on reputation. And reputation was crumbling before his eyes. Vanessa tried to laugh it off, raising her glass. "Everyone loves to gossip. Don't believe everything you hear." But her laughter rang hollow. Guests exchanged knowing glances. The seed of doubt had already sprouted. Outside the hotel, paparazzi swarmed like vultures, their lenses waiting for blood. They smelled scandal, the kind that could sell millions of copies. By morning, Edward's carefully built image would be shredded. And then came the cruelest twist. One of the hospital staff, desperate to reach Edward, called his office line. The assistant panicked, leaked the truth to a reporter friend. Within minutes, a breaking news banner flashed across the city's biggest news network. CEO Edward Langston marries Mistress while wife fights for life, giving birth to triplets. The reception hall erupted as guests' phones buzzed with notifications. Screens lit up showing the headline, the photos, the scandal in black and white. Gasps turned to outrage. How could he? Triplets, and he's here? This is monstrous. Vanessa's face paled beneath her makeup. Edward grabbed her hand, forcing a smile for the cameras, but his eyes betrayed fury. He leaned down, whispering, "If this ruins me, it ruins you too." Vanessa's jaw tightened. She wasn't afraid of the whispers. She was afraid that Edward might decide she wasn't worth the cost. Meanwhile, in the hospital, doctors worked tirelessly. "We're losing her pulse," one shouted. Clara pressed Lila's hand to her chest, whispering, "Think of your babies. Don't give up. Don't let him win." In her unconscious haze, Lila's mind drifted to a vision. She saw her 3 children, tiny hands reaching for her. She saw her mother, smiling gently, whispering the same words she had heard as a child. "You are worth more than gold." Her heart monitor beeped weakly, each sound a fragile thread between life and death. Back at the hotel, Edward tried to take the microphone, but the noise was deafening. Guests shouted, reporters snapped photos, and the orchestra had long gone silent. His empire was slipping from his grasp. And then, from the back of the room, a voice rang out clear as a bell. A woman, her tone sharp with contempt. "You left your wife to die, Edward, and when she survives, because she will, you'll regret every choice you made." The crowd turned to see who had spoken. Gasps filled the room. Because standing in the doorway was someone no one expected. Someone who could destroy Edward's world with a single truth. The hospital room was a storm of chaos. Machines screamed with urgent alarms, their sharp beeps cutting through the sterile air. Nurses moved quickly, their voices tight with fear. "Blood pressure's dropping," one shouted. "We need more oxygen, now!" Lila's body was frail, trembling, her skin ghostly pale. Her lips moved faintly, whispering words no one could hear. Her chest rose and fell shallowly, as if every breath was borrowed from the edge of eternity. Dr. Patel, the lead physician, barked orders. "Clamp harder, suction. We cannot lose her. Those babies need their mother." The 3 infants, safe but fragile, lay in incubators nearby, their tiny cries piercing the tension. The sound of their wails sliced through the nurses' hearts. They knew what was at stake. They weren't just saving a woman, they were fighting for the bond that tied a mother to her children. Meanwhile, across town, the scandal at the wedding had spiraled out of control. Guests no longer danced, no longer laughed. Instead, they gossiped in hushed tones, phones buzzing with updates from the news. Edward tried to salvage his image, but every word sounded hollow. "She's dying in labor, Edward," one guest spat, glaring at him. "And you're here drinking champagne. What kind of man does that?" Edward's smile faltered. For the first time, fear crept into his expression. It wasn't fear for Lila, it was fear for himself. His empire was built on reputation, and reputation was bleeding out faster than Lila's fragile body. Vanessa, sensing the crowd's shift, tightened her grip on Edward's arm. "Ignore them," she whispered. "This is still our night. Let her go. She's weak. You don't need her." But the guests weren't letting go. Cameras flashed, recording every twitch of Edward's jaw, every tremble of Vanessa's smile. And in the background, the big screen that once displayed their engagement photos now glowed with breaking news headlines. CEO Edward Langston abandons pregnant wife, Mistress at his side. Edward's chest tightened. He had spent years climbing to the top, and in one evening, it all threatened to collapse. Back in the hospital, Lila's heart monitor flatlined for a brief, horrifying moment. The shrill sound froze everyone in place. Clara, the young nurse who had been at her side since the beginning, screamed, "No, come back to us!" Dr. Patel shouted, "Charge the paddles. We're bringing her back." The defibrillator pads pressed against her chest. Clear. Electricity surged through Lila's frail body, jerking her upward before she fell back limp. The monitor blipped faintly, then flatlined again. Clara's tears streamed down her face. She bent close, whispering fiercely, "Lila, your babies need you. They need their mother. Don't let him win. Don't let him raise them without you." Her words, desperate and trembling, seemed to echo into whatever space Lila's soul hovered in. Inside the darkness of unconsciousness, Lila's mind drifted. She saw her mother again, Elena, standing in a meadow filled with sunlight, smiling gently. "It's not your time, my little star," Elena whispered. "You have 3 lights waiting for you. You must go back." A tear slipped from Lila's closed eye. The doctor saw it and screamed, "Charge again, higher voltage." Clear, her body jolted once more. This time, the monitor beeped weakly, then stronger, then steadier. A fragile rhythm returned, a heartbeat. "She's back," a nurse shouted. Relief rippled through the room, but it was fragile. Lila wasn't safe yet. She was alive, but barely. Back at the hotel, Edward excused himself under the guise of urgent business. He slipped into a side corridor, his phone pressed to his ear. "Tell me the truth," he snapped at his assistant. "Is she alive?" The voice on the other end hesitated. She coded for a moment, sir. But they brought her back. The babies are alive too." Edward's fist clenched. Relief flickered, but not for her sake. For his. 3 heirs, a powerful legacy. The Langston name would echo through generations. But that relief quickly turned to dread. If Lila survived, she held the key to destroy him. Vanessa followed, her heels clicking against the marble. "You're not seriously considering going to her," she hissed. "If you show weakness now, you'll lose everything." Edward's jaw tightened. "If she dies, I inherit everything clean. If she lives, she owns half of me." Vanessa's eyes darkened. She had always feared Lila's shadow. Even half dead, even erased from tabloids, the first wife still held a power Vanessa couldn't steal. "She'll never be strong enough to fight you," Vanessa said quickly. "She's nothing. Let the doctors finish what nature already started, then we'll be untouchable." But Edward didn't answer. For the first time, doubt gnawed at him. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Clara sat by Lila's bed after the chaos settled, holding her hand tightly. "You're stronger than he ever believed," she whispered. "One day, you'll show him, and the world will stand with you." The triplets slept soundly in their incubators, their tiny chests rising and falling. They were fragile, but alive. Their cries had quieted, replaced by soft breaths. They were the proof of Lila's strength, the living legacy of her love. But Lila herself was not out of danger. The doctor approached Clara quietly. "She's stable for now, but the next 24 hours will decide everything." Clara nodded, stroking Lila's hand. "Then we'll fight every second of those hours." Back at the hotel, the reception was unraveling. Guests began leaving, muttering in disgust. Reporters shouted questions. Edward refused to answer. Vanessa smiled tightly for the cameras, but her eyes were filled with fear. She knew the tide was turning, and Edward's grip on power was slipping. Edward stood alone for a moment, staring at his reflection in a gilded mirror. For the first time in years, he didn't see triumph. He saw a man on the verge of ruin. And then his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. He opened it, his eyes narrowing. The words chilled him to the bone. "She's alive, and she knows." Edward's hands trembled. Who sent it? How? He looked around the ballroom, suddenly paranoid. Vanessa returned, placing her hand on his shoulder. "What is it?" Edward didn't answer. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his heart pounding. Because if Lila was alive, and if she truly knew what he had done, then the real war hadn't even begun. The hospital had finally quieted after the storm. Lila lay still in her bed, the soft hum of machines keeping rhythm with her fragile breaths. The room was dim, but the glow of the incubators lit her with a faint halo. 3 tiny lives, her triplets, slept peacefully, their innocence untouched by betrayal. Clara, the devoted nurse, sat vigil at her side, unwilling to let her face the silence alone. In that silence, something inside Lila stirred. She was no longer just a wife abandoned, no longer just a weak girl clinging to hope. The brush with death had carved her raw, but it had also lit a fire. Her body was broken, but her spirit had begun to rise from the ashes. When her eyes opened, Clara leaned forward quickly. "Lila, you're awake," she whispered, her relief flooding the room. Lila's voice was raspy but firm. "My babies?" Clara pointed to the incubators. "They're alive. All 3. 2 girls and a boy. They're fighters, just like their mother." A tear slid down Lila's cheek, but it wasn't weakness. It was resolve. She turned her head, her voice steadier than Clara expected. "Then I can't leave them. I won't let Edward or anyone else steal their future." Clara blinked. She had seen mothers weep, beg, surrender. But in Lila's eyes she saw something different. Steel hidden beneath scars. "You're not alone in this," Clara said softly. "There are people who know what he's done, and they want to help you." Lila's brows furrowed. "Help me?" Clara hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a flash drive. "I shouldn't be doing this, but one of Edward's assistants came to me tonight. She couldn't stand watching him destroy you. She gave me this. It's proof. Emails, contracts, photos, everything that ties Edward to Vanessa, everything he tried to bury." Lila stared at the small piece of plastic, her heart racing. Evidence, the very thing Edward had always controlled with his money and threats, was now in her hand. For the first time she felt the balance tilt. Meanwhile, at the Langston mansion, Edward paced furiously. Vanessa lounged on the velvet sofa, swirling wine in her glass, pretending calm. But her eyes betrayed her unease. "You look worried," she said smoothly. "Why? She's weak in a hospital bed. You're still here with me." Edward slammed his fist on the table. "She's alive, Vanessa. Alive. And someone sent me a message saying she knows." Vanessa froze, her glass trembling slightly. "Knows what?" Edward's glare was sharp. "Everything." Silence hung heavy between them. For years, Edward had believed himself untouchable. He had silenced competitors, buried scandals, bought loyalty. But if Lila had evidence, if she could expose him, it wouldn't just destroy his marriage. It would destroy his empire. Vanessa placed her glass down carefully. "Then we strike first. If she wants a war, we make sure she never leaves that hospital alive." Edward looked at her, shocked at her bluntness, but then slowly nodded. "If she thinks she can stand against me, she'll regret it." But what Edward didn't know was that Lila was no longer fighting alone. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the hospital blinds, Lila sat up weakly, determination etched on her face. Clara entered with a man in a suit, mid-30s, sharp eyes, but kind. "Lila," Clara said, "this is Daniel Hayes. He's an investigative journalist. He's been following Edward's corruption for years, but he never had a way in, until now." Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady. "Mrs. Langston, I know this is overwhelming, but if you want justice, if you want to protect your children, I can help you. Edward thinks he's untouchable, but he's left a trail. All we need is your voice, your courage." Lila's hand trembled, but she gripped the flash drive tightly. "For my babies," she whispered. "For them, I'll fight." Daniel nodded. "Then we bring the truth to light." Back at the mansion, Vanessa tried to steady Edward's nerves. She stroked his arm, whispering venom disguised as comfort. "You built everything. No one can touch you. The world will believe your story over hers. She's a fragile woman, broken, barely alive. And you're the empire." But Edward wasn't convinced. That single message, "she knows," echoed in his head like a warning bell. His empire might not crumble from force, but from the truth. At the hospital, Lila gathered her strength. She was still weak, her body stitched and scarred, but her spirit felt different. No longer the girl who once believed Edward's lies. She was a mother with 3 lives depending on her. And for them, she would rise. Daniel laid out the plan. "We'll start slow. A press leak, a whisper here and there. The public already smells blood from the wedding scandal. When the time is right, we'll hit them with the full truth. But you need to be ready, Lila. Edward will fight back hard." Lila looked down at her babies, her eyes softening. "He can't hurt me anymore. Not the way he used to. If he wants war, I'll give him war." That night, Edward sat in his office, staring out at the city skyline, whiskey in hand. Vanessa approached from behind, wrapping her arms around him. "Forget her," she whispered. "She's dying. And if she survives, we'll finish what nature couldn't." Edward said nothing. But deep down, he knew Vanessa's words were poison. And for the first time, he wondered if he had allied himself with someone even more dangerous than Lila. Back at the hospital, Lila pressed the flash drive into Daniel's hand. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a strength no one expected. "Tell the world the truth. I don't care what happens to me. But my children will grow up knowing their mother fought for them." Daniel nodded, his eyes filled with respect. "You're braver than you think, Lila. Edward won't see you coming." And somewhere in the city, as Edward poured another drink, his phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. "The world will soon know who you really are." Edward's hand shook. He dropped the glass, shards scattering across the floor. And in that moment, he realized his empire wasn't under attack from outside enemies. It was collapsing from the one woman he had underestimated most. The days after Lila's recovery were a blur of whispers, headlines, and shifting tides. What once seemed impossible, the mighty Edward Langston being questioned, doubted, even mocked, was now happening before the world's eyes. Daniel's articles hit the press like lightning bolts. At first, small leaks, photos of Edward and Vanessa together during Lila's pregnancy, emails where Edward spoke coldly of disposing of problems, contracts forged to cover affairs. But then came the real storm. Vanessa's financial records, showing she had siphoned company funds into her own secret accounts. The empire Edward built began to wobble on its golden pedestal. The public turned. No longer were Edward and Vanessa the glamorous couple gracing magazine covers. They became the city's most despised figures. Justice for Lila trended across social media. Protesters gathered outside Langston headquarters, holding signs that read, "A real man doesn't abandon his family." Inside the hospital, Lila grew stronger each day. She still bore the scars of her near-death battle, but every time she looked at her babies, she felt renewed strength. Clara was always at her side, feeding her soup, watching the triplets with tender care. And Daniel kept her updated on Edward's unraveling empire. One afternoon, as she held her son against her chest, Daniel entered with a calm but urgent expression. "Lila," he said, "Edward is holding a press conference tomorrow. He's going to try to spin this, make himself the victim. But you have the choice to speak too, to tell your story." Lila looked down at her tiny child, his fist curled against her heart. For years, she had been silent, controlled, erased. But now she had a voice, and it could protect not just herself, but her children's future. "I'll speak," she whispered. "Not for me, for them." The next day, the city gathered for Edward's grand attempt at redemption. The press conference was staged in his company's glass tower lobby, a spectacle of polished marble and towering windows. Edward stood at the podium, Vanessa beside him, both dressed in their finest. But the cameras didn't love them the way they once had. Their smiles looked rehearsed, their charm worn thin. "Ladies and gentlemen," Edward began, his voice rich with false sincerity, "there have been rumors, exaggerations, and outright lies spread about me and my family. I want to set the record straight." But he never finished. Because at that exact moment, the doors at the back opened, and a collective gasp swept through the crowd. Lila entered. She wasn't the fragile, broken woman Edward had left behind. She wore a simple but elegant dress, her hair brushed neatly, her posture tall. Clara pushed the stroller carrying the triplets, while Daniel walked beside them protectively. The cameras turned, flashes exploding like fireworks. Edward's face drained of color. Vanessa's smile cracked. Lila walked to the front with quiet dignity, her gaze steady. When she reached the podium, she placed a hand on the stroller, grounding herself in the presence of her children. Her voice was soft, but it carried. "I am Lila Martinez Langston, and I am not invisible." The crowd hushed, leaning closer. "For years I believed in a man who promised me love, protection, and forever. I gave him my loyalty, my youth, my life. When I carried his children, 3 at once, he should have stood beside me. But instead, while I fought for my life in a hospital bed, he stood at an altar with another woman." Gasps filled the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras zooming in. Edward's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, his lawyer tugging at his sleeve to do the same. Lila continued, her eyes glistening but strong. "I nearly died bringing these children into the world. And if I had died, they would have grown up believing their mother was nothing but a shadow. But I'm alive, and I will not let them grow up thinking betrayal is power or cruelty is love." The crowd erupted in applause. Hashtags formed instantly. "Lila speaks, triplets of truth." Daniel stepped forward, handing the reporters folders. "The proof, the emails, the contracts. These documents show exactly who Edward Langston is. A man who exploited, who lied, who betrayed not just his wife, but his company, his shareholders, and his city." The press went wild. Edward tried to speak, but the microphones were turned toward Lila now, the people's eyes locked on her, not him. Vanessa, realizing the tide had fully turned, snapped at Edward in a harsh whisper. "Do something. Stop her." But Edward was frozen. He had built his empire on fear, but fear no longer worked. The truth was louder. By evening, every news station carried Lila's speech. Across the city, people cried, cheered, and shared her story. Women saw themselves in her pain and her courage. Men questioned their own actions, their own loyalties, and the once invincible Edward Langston was left to drown in the weight of his own arrogance. In the weeks that followed, investigations began. Edward faced charges for fraud, embezzlement. Have you ever loved someone so much you didn't see the betrayal coming until it shattered you in front of everyone? She was pregnant, vulnerable, and at a gala full of strangers, her husband slapped her across the face. But this story, it doesn't end in pain, it begins there. Trust me, stay until the end, because the most unexpected part is waiting right where you'd never expect. Now, let me tell you her story. A sharp crack echoed through the grand ballroom, like a whip across marble. It wasn't the pop of champagne. It wasn't a microphone feedback. It was a sound that silenced laughter, froze movement, and turned a night of celebration into a battleground. Gasps rippled through the glittering crowd, hands flew to mouths, and every eye turned toward the center of the chaos. There stood a pregnant woman, her hand pressed to her cheek, eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Her dress, a soft navy satin, clung to her baby bump gently, her entire body trembling. Her glossy lips quivered, not from pain, but from the sheer horror of what had just happened. Her name was Emily Hart, and she had just been slapped across the face by her husband, Preston Hale, CEO of Hale Tech Solutions. A man who wore power like a custom-made suit, who built an empire from coding scripts in a basement to launching global security systems for Fortune 100s. To the world, he was a visionary, a leader, a genius. But tonight, he was something else, a monster. His voice cut through the stunned silence. "I told you to stay home, Emily. You always have to make everything about you, don't you?" His tone was not angry. It was venomous. The slap wasn't about rage, it was about control. Emily didn't speak. Not yet, her palm still on her cheek, skin already red from the force of his blow. She looked around, as if trying to make sense of where she was, of who she had become, and of the man who just laid hands on her, in front of 400 witnesses, cameras, reporters, and dignitaries. This was the Bright Star Philanthropy Gala, the annual event that brought together CEOs, politicians, celebrities, and global influencers, a night of glitter and gowns, luxury and lies. Tonight was supposed to be about charitable tech advancement. Instead, it had become the scene of a very public humiliation. Preston didn't stop there. He leaned in, lowered his voice, and hissed, "You're nothing but a liability. I told you I didn't want you here. This was my night. You ruin everything." Behind him, smirking like a snake in silk, was Natalie Vance, his so-called strategic consultant. Dressed in a crimson gown that left little to the imagination, she watched with cruel delight, her perfectly arched eyebrow lifted as if to say, she had it coming. The room remained still. No one spoke. No one stepped forward, until one man did. From the far end of the ballroom, a tall figure in a tailored black tuxedo began striding forward. His posture was calm, but his eyes burned with quiet fury. He cut through the crowd like a blade, guests parting without realizing why. He didn't look at Preston. He looked only at Emily. "Emily," he said gently. "Are you all right?" Preston's head whipped around. "What the hell are you doing here?" The man ignored him. He took off his jacket and draped it over Emily's shoulders. "Let's get you out of here." Emily blinked, her eyes now filled not just with tears but recognition. It was Liam Devereaux, a multi-millionaire investor, media-shy, calculated, rumored to be buying controlling interest in half the corporations at this very event. No one knew what he was doing at a tech gala tonight. But now, they had their answer. He wasn't here for tech, he was here for Emily. Preston stepped forward. "Don't you dare touch her, she's my wife." "Correction," Liam replied coolly, stepping between them. "She's a woman, one you just assaulted in public." Preston's nostrils flared. "This is none of your business." "You made it everyone's business the second you laid a hand on her in a room full of witnesses," Liam snapped, his voice rising just enough to make heads turn again. "And believe me, I'll make sure that slap costs you everything." Preston's jaw clenched, fists curling, but he said nothing. Because he knew who Liam Devereaux was, and he knew what he could do. Emily finally found her voice. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it was steady. "You will regret this, Preston Hale," she said. "Everything you've built, everything you think you own, will come crashing down." Her words didn't tremble. They cut like glass, and for the first time in years, Preston looked uncertain. Liam placed a gentle hand on her lower back. "Come on, Emily." The two walked out, her steps slow but firm, head held high despite the tears now spilling from her eyes. As they passed, the crowd stepped aside, a silent corridor of shock and sympathy. Phones came out, cameras clicked, and just like that, Emily's humiliation had gone viral. But that's the thing about public disgrace. It's only the beginning. Because behind every downfall is a rise. And this was not the end of Emily Hart. This was her rebirth. To the world, Emily Hart was just a wife, a pretty face with a soft voice, a woman who stood quietly beside her high-profile husband at events, smiled when spoken to, and never caused a scene. They saw her baby bump and assumed she was fragile, dependent, powerless. But they were wrong. So wrong. Because before she was Mrs. Hale, Emily Hart was something else entirely. She was a force. Born and raised in Stamford, Connecticut, Emily had always been the girl no one saw coming. Her mother, a high school English teacher, and her father, a mechanic, worked day and night to give her the kind of life they never had. She didn't grow up with wealth, but she grew up with something far more powerful: grit. From the moment she learned to read, Emily devoured knowledge. She wasn't just smart, she was strategic. By the time she graduated high school, she had a full ride to Wharton, a 4.0 GPA, and internship offers from 3 different investment firms in New York City. She took them all. Rotating between internships and coursework, Emily built a network of contacts before she could legally rent a car. She didn't party. She didn't post. While other students chased attention, Emily chased leverage. By 23, she was working as a junior analyst at Polaris Capital, a hedge fund known for chewing up Ivy grads and spitting them out. She didn't just survive, she thrived. Her instincts were razor sharp. Her recommendations made clients money, real money. And that earned her respect from people who didn't give it easily. But Emily wanted more. Not just the paycheck. Not even the prestige. She wanted to build. She started working nights on a financial forecasting app for small businesses, an AI-powered system that could help mom-and-pop shops avoid collapse in unstable markets. It wasn't glamorous, but it was powerful. She quietly pitched the prototype to a few friends in venture capital. One of them offered her $2 million in seed funding, and that was the moment she met Preston Hale. He was on the panel at a tech networking event in Soho. Confident, charming. He spoke with the kind of self-assurance that turned heads. Emily had seen men like him before, loud, cocky, alpha to the bone. But Preston noticed her. And for the first time, someone powerful was looking at her not just for her brain, but with desire. They talked over whiskey and wood-fired pizza after the panel. He asked questions, listened, made her laugh. It was electric. Within a week, he was texting her every night. Within a month, they were inseparable. Emily didn't tell him about her funding. She didn't need to. Preston made her feel like she could stop fighting for once, that she could just be, that she didn't have to constantly prove her worth. He promised a partnership, love, safety. So she let go. She shelved the startup. She stepped away from Polaris. She deleted the pitch deck from her laptop. She chose Preston. They moved in together in Midtown. Then came the wedding, a sleek, expensive affair filled with polished smiles and strategic guests. Preston's colleagues called her lucky. His investors called her graceful. And behind closed doors, he called her his rock. But slowly, the cracks began to show. The affection turned to control. "You don't need to work anymore, babe," he said a few months into marriage. "We're a brand now. People expect a certain image." At first, she agreed. She joined boards, ran a nonprofit for financial literacy. She made herself useful, respectable. But the more she contributed, the more Preston pulled back. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a shadow. Every time she shared an idea, he shot it down. When she suggested a joint initiative between Hale Tech and a nonprofit incubator, he laughed. "You really think the board wants input from a housewife?" That word hit harder than any slap, housewife. As if she hadn't once negotiated equity deals worth 7 figures. As if she hadn't built a prototype that could have gone global. As if her mind meant nothing. Still, Emily stayed. Because she believed in vows, in second chances, in starting a family. When she found out she was pregnant, she thought things would change. They didn't. Preston's reaction was lukewarm at best. "Well," he muttered, "guess we're really doing this." No flowers, no kiss, no celebration. He began staying late, traveling more, gaslighting her when she asked questions. "Stop being so emotional, Emily. You're pregnant, not paranoid." Then came the photo, sent anonymously, Preston, at a rooftop bar, holding hands with Natalie Vance, whispering into her ear. Emily stared at the image for hours, her hands shaking, her stomach in knots, but she didn't cry. She planned. Because the woman Preston thought he married, the quiet one, the soft one, the one who stayed in her lane, was only one version of Emily, and that version was gone. Over the next few weeks, Emily reactivated her old network. She met with lawyers, reached out to former clients, dug up her old IP files, quietly reclaimed the app she once built. Only this time with a new name and a silent partner, Liam Devereaux. Yes, that Liam. The investor Preston once tried to charm at a corporate dinner. The man who saw through his arrogance immediately and refused to fund any of his ventures. Turns out Liam had a soft spot for underdogs, especially brilliant ones who'd been betrayed. Liam didn't just invest in Emily's idea. He rebranded it, scaled it, and positioned it for a multi-million-dollar Series A round. And now Emily wasn't just a wife, she was a founder, a soon-to-be mother, and someone Preston would soon regret ever underestimating. The Bright Star Philanthropy Gala wasn't just another event on the social calendar. It was the event. Held annually at the opulent Langston Grand, the night was a fever dream of wealth, power, and reputation. Politicians, tech billionaires, influencers, venture capitalists, and celebrities packed into a ballroom carved from marble and gold. It was where deals were whispered between champagne toasts and where appearances were everything. This year's theme, Innovate for Humanity. The irony was thick. Crystal chandeliers floated above the crowd like inverted icebergs. The floor beneath them shimmered with polished obsidian, and every corner of the room glowed under soft candlelight and curated spotlights. Tables were dressed in silver linens, each adorned with floral arrangements flown in from Paris and name cards written in calligraphy. Preston Hale, as CEO of Hale Tech Solutions, was the unofficial king of the evening. He was set to receive the Tech Impact Award for his company's latest AI security platform, which he claimed would revolutionize online safety for nonprofits. That night, he arrived with Natalie Vance on his arm. She wore a red satin gown with a thigh-high slit and a plunging neckline. She turned heads, but not in admiration, in quiet scandal. Everyone in the room knew she wasn't his wife, but no one dared say it. Not to Preston Hale. His reputation for crushing competitors extended beyond business. He was untouchable, or so he thought. As cameras flashed and a photographer called out, "Mr. Hale, look this way," Preston smirked, adjusted his cufflinks, and pulled Natalie closer for a shot that would make it to the morning pages. The perfect image. The perfect deception. But while Preston basked in the spotlight, something was happening at the top of the grand staircase. Emily Hart arrived. Dressed in deep navy velvet, her maternity gown hugged her figure with elegance and strength. Her hair was swept into a loose bun, her makeup soft but striking. She didn't wear diamonds, just a pair of silver earrings her mother gave her at graduation, and a look in her eyes that said, "I'm not here to beg. I'm here to end this." The crowd began to notice. One by one, heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Gasps spread like wildfire. And then the whispers began. "Oh my God! Is that Emily Hart? She's pregnant. She came with Liam Devereaux?" Yes, she did. On her left arm was the man who rarely made public appearances, Liam Devereaux. In a sleek black tux, no tie, hair slightly tousled, and a quiet fire in his gaze. He didn't need to say a word. His presence alone spoke volumes. The pair descended the marble stairs slowly, deliberately, like royalty. Preston saw them halfway down. The smugness drained from his face. He blinked once, then twice, as if trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Natalie noticed too, her arm still linked in his. "Who the hell is that?" she whispered. "That's my wife," he said under his breath. Emily and Liam reached the base of the stairs, the room now silent. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. Time stood still. Preston strode forward, his voice tight. "Emily, what are you doing here?" She looked him in the eye, steady and unshaken. "It's a public event, and I thought it was important to support the man I married. You know, the one who preaches integrity while sleeping with his consultant." There was a collective inhale. All pretense dropped. "Get out," Preston hissed. "You're embarrassing yourself." "No," Liam interrupted, stepping between them. "You embarrassed yourself when you thought no one would notice." "This is between me and my wife," Preston growled. Emily's tone didn't waver. "You made it between you and the world the moment you brought her here." Natalie scoffed. "This is pathetic." Emily turned to her. "You're not even a threat. You're just a placeholder." And that's when it happened. Preston's rage boiled over. He reached up and slapped Emily across the face. The sound of the impact cracked through the ballroom like lightning. Everyone froze. Emily staggered slightly but didn't fall. Liam caught her elbow. She touched her cheek. No tears, no scream, just silence. Then slowly she turned back to Preston. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." The photographers, frozen in shock moments ago, snapped into motion. Flash, flash, flash. Every image, every angle, capturing the downfall of Preston Hale in real time. Security stepped forward, unsure of what to do. Emily raised her hand. "Don't, I'm leaving." She turned to Liam. "We're done here." The pair walked away, the crowd parting like water. Some guests clapped, softly, hesitantly. Others reached out, offering supportive nods or whispered words. But Emily didn't need their pity. She didn't need anything from this world anymore. The gala, meant to be Preston's crowning glory, had become his public execution. He stood alone, eyes wide, face pale, lips trembling. For the first time in his life, he had no control. And upstairs in the VIP lounge, Emily's lawyer was waiting, with divorce papers and evidence ready to go. Behind the charm, the jawline, and the boardroom victories, Preston Hale was something else entirely. To most of the world, he was a self-made success story, a tech titan who'd bootstrapped his way from a second-hand laptop in a dorm room to billion-dollar IPOs. He was the man who gave TED Talks about leadership, signed seven-figure checks at charity events, and posed for glossy magazine covers beside glossy women. But Emily Hart knew better. She had lived with the real Preston. Not the one who smiled for Forbes, but the one who slammed doors behind closed ones. The one who smiled through his teeth and manipulated with a lover's touch. The man who made her feel like she owed him everything. And for years, she believed him. Preston's rise to power had been fast. Faster than most men could handle. The first version of HailTech was a cybersecurity plugin he coded in a shared apartment in Brooklyn. But once it caught the attention of a government contractor, everything changed. Contracts poured in. Investors lined up. Venture capitalists came sniffing like bloodhounds. He wasn't ready for it. That's when he changed. He started surrounding himself with people who told him what he wanted to hear. Yes men. Image consultants, PR handlers, people who inflated his ego like a balloon begging to burst. And then there was Emily, his anchor. At first, he loved that she was grounded, smart, respected. She was everything his industry friends weren't. But over time, her presence began to annoy him. She didn't care about fame. She didn't dress for headlines. And worst of all, she still saw through him. He hated that, especially as the cracks began to form in HailTech. See, Preston didn't actually build most of the tech his company was famous for. That was his CTO, a soft-spoken genius named Ravi Singh, who preferred keyboards to cameras. Preston, on the other hand, took all the credit. Always had. But Ravi had grown tired of being invisible. Right before the gala, he had quietly filed a lawsuit, one that, if it ever went public, would expose Preston's fraudulent claims of innovator and reveal that most of the patents were stolen or misattributed. Preston was scrambling to bury it, and that's when he doubled down on the illusion. He hired Natalie Vance, not for her qualifications, but for her image. She was young, loud, and oblivious to ethics. She knew how to be seen, and that's exactly what Preston needed. A distraction. Someone to play arm candy while he maneuvered behind the curtain. But Natalie wasn't as dumb as she looked. She was ambitious, and unlike Emily, she demanded recognition. She saw Preston's vulnerabilities, his legal troubles, his crumbling empire, and she decided to sink her claws in while she still could. Meanwhile, Emily had begun to suspect the truth. The late nights, the sudden business trips, the canceled doctor appointments, and the final straw, an unmarked envelope delivered to their doorman containing photos. Preston, Natalie, a hotel suite, the timestamps didn't lie. But Emily didn't confront him, not yet, because she had something better, time. While Preston thought he was sneaking around, Emily was rebuilding herself behind his back. What he didn't know was that she'd quietly reassembled her old financial contacts, updated her intellectual property portfolio, and even secured angel investors for the very startup she once shelved to support his dream. She was done being his cheerleader. Preston's world began to unravel in layers. At the same time, he was publicly parading Natalie around. His in-house legal counsel quit unexpectedly. The PR firm he paid handsomely dropped him. And worst of all, Liam Devereaux had acquired a 12% stake in HailTech through a silent partner, which meant Preston was no longer the biggest voice in the room. Then came the Bright Star Gala, the night that was supposed to restore his image, show the world he was still the golden boy. He wore his best suit, brought his flashiest date, practiced his speech like a Broadway monologue, and then Emily showed up, pregnant, powerful, and arm in arm with the man he hated most. The slap? That wasn't a slip of anger. That was the final crack in a man who'd built an empire on lies and couldn't stand to see the one person who truly knew him rise without him. After Emily left the gala, Preston's night spiraled fast. Reporters cornered him, sponsors pulled out. A viral video of the incident began trending by midnight. Tech CEO assaults pregnant wife at charity gala became the headline heard around the world. And still, Natalie stayed by his side for about 5 more hours. By morning, she was gone. Left behind a note in his penthouse suite, "You're not worth the brand damage." Now, Preston was alone. His board called an emergency meeting. His mother, who lived in Palm Beach, refused to answer his calls. And Emily? Emily's lawyer filed for divorce, citing emotional and physical abuse, public humiliation, and financial manipulation. She had receipts, emails, voice recordings, statements from household staff, and most damning of all, Copies of investor reports that showed Preston lied about revenue to boost his stock price. Preston Hale, once the darling of the tech world, was now under SEC investigation. His bank accounts were frozen, his social media wiped clean, and his strategic consultant posting bikini photos from Cabo with hashtags like Fresh Start and Never Again. But perhaps what hurt Preston the most wasn't the money. It was that Emily didn't care. She didn't cry, didn't call, didn't even react when he sent his lawyer a letter requesting a private conversation to reconcile, because she was already gone, already building something new. And Preston Hale? He was no longer the villain in Emily's story. He was just a lesson. The slap wasn't just a moment, it became a movement. By the next morning, the video of Preston Hale striking his pregnant wife at the Bright Star Gala had gone viral across every major platform. It was shared on X, reshared on TikTok, dissected on YouTube, and posted on thousands of Instagram stories with captions like, "This is what power unchecked looks like." But the worst part for Preston? No one defended him. Not a single person. The footage was damning. High definition, multiple angles, close-ups of his enraged expression. One clip even captured the moment Liam Devereaux stepped between him and Emily, looking every bit the hero while Preston fumed like a rabid animal. The internet didn't hesitate. Preston Hale is over trended within hours. So did Protect Emily and Stand with Pregnant Women. By noon, Hale Tech stock plummeted 32%. Shareholders were furious. Advertisers pulled out, nonprofits cut ties. News outlets that once featured him as a tech visionary now used phrases like abuser, fraud, and toxic figurehead. And then came the lawsuits. The first one hit before 2 p.m. Ravi Singh, Hale Tech's co-founder and CTO, filed a whistleblower complaint. He claimed Preston misrepresented the company's intellectual property and manipulated tech demo results to impress investors. The documents included screenshots, email threads, and even recorded calls. That was followed by a class action suit from early investors who felt misled by false projections. Suddenly, Preston Hale wasn't just a scandal. He was a criminal case in the making, and the walls closed in fast. His corporate card was frozen. His personal assistant resigned. Natalie Vance, who had stuck around just long enough to enjoy a free ride, went on a podcast the next day and said, "Honestly, he always scared me. He had this dark energy. I'm just glad Emily got out before it was too late." That hurt more than the lawsuits, because deep down, Preston believed Natalie needed him. Just like he once believed Emily did. Now both women were gone and making headlines without him. Within 48 hours of the gala, Preston was ordered to step down as CEO. He tried to push back, tried to argue with the board. "This is all a smear campaign," he barked. "She planned this. It's all Devereaux." But no one listened. No one cared. They had their own reputations to protect. Hale Tech's board voted 9-1 to remove him immediately and issue a public apology to Emily Hart. Preston watched the live stream of that press conference from the kitchen of his now half-empty penthouse. Reporters huddled outside the glass tower, trying to catch a glimpse. His phone rang non-stop with unknown numbers. Probably lawyers. Maybe the SEC. Possibly paparazzi. He stopped answering. He stopped everything. By day 3, he was a ghost in his own empire. Headlines no longer used his name to boost clicks. Now they used Emily's. From betrayed wife to rising founder, Emily Hart signs with Devereaux Capital. Pregnant, powerful, and poised, Emily Hart is the new face of resilience. He couldn't escape her. She was everywhere. News programs aired soft-focus interviews of her walking into office buildings with Liam Devereaux by her side. She looked calm, composed. Her belly more prominent now. Her eyes filled with the kind of strength Preston had spent years trying to diminish. She had never looked more alive. And Preston had never felt more irrelevant. He tried calling her once, a late-night voicemail, slurred and desperate. "Emily, I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. You know me. You know I wasn't trying to. Look, can we just talk? Without lawyers? Just us, please." She never responded. Instead, her legal team released a statement the next morning. "Miss Hart has no further comment at this time. She remains focused on her health, her business, and her child." Preston replayed that message 10 times. Her child, not their child, and that cut deeper than any headline. The tabloids went into overdrive. They dug into Preston's past, high school fights, former girlfriends, toxic emails, every misstep he'd ever buried under charm and money. Suddenly, The man who once owned the room couldn't walk into a restaurant without getting dirty looks. He started wearing hats and sunglasses in public, not for fashion, for shame. He was no longer the man people envied. He was the cautionary tale. His own parents, both conservative and image-obsessed, issued a public statement condemning his behavior. "We are heartbroken by the footage and deeply ashamed of our son's actions. Our thoughts are with Emily." He didn't even get a phone call, just a press release. By week 2, the eviction notice came. The luxury penthouse in Midtown was owned by a Hale Tech trust. The board moved to liquidate assets to cover potential legal fees. Preston was told to vacate the property by Friday. He packed in silence. No staff, no wife, no Natalie, no friends, just boxes and broken pride. He moved into a corporate apartment on the Lower East Side. Smaller, darker, no view, just the constant echo of what used to be. Meanwhile, Emily's startup, now rebranded as Hardcore, made front-page business news for securing a $12 million Series A investment. With Liam Devereaux as her lead backer, she positioned the company to disrupt the financial forecasting sector within months. TechCrunch called her a phoenix. Forbes called her a storm in a silk dress. And Emily? She said nothing. She let the work speak for itself. That silence, her silence, drove Preston mad. Not the loss of Hale Tech, not the fall from grace, but the way she moved on, as if he never mattered, as if he were already dead, because in her story, maybe he was. On the outside, Emily Hart looked unstoppable. The headlines were glowing, the startup was thriving, investors were lining up, and every photo of her, walking into boardrooms with Liam Devereaux, attending meetings with a baby bump under designer maternity coats, seemed to scream, she won. But no one saw what happened when the cameras turned off. No one saw the night she couldn't breathe. It was a Tuesday. Rain slid down the windows of her new townhome in Tribeca. Everything was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that made your own heartbeat sound like a war drum. Emily sat curled up on the couch, cradling a cup of ginger tea she never touched. She stared at the ultrasound photo on the coffee table. 26 weeks. The baby was healthy, strong heartbeat, active. She should have been happy. But instead, her chest felt like it was caving in. Because strength, real strength, costs something. And right now, Emily was paying for every ounce she had left. She hadn't slept in 3 nights. Her body ached from the weight of expectation. Every room she entered now demanded excellence. Her face had become a symbol. People looked at her like she was some kind of icon for betrayed women everywhere. But no one asked if she was okay. They just assumed. Emily rubbed her belly, eyes stinging. She hadn't cried since the night of the gala. Not once, not when the divorce papers went viral. Not when reporters chased her car. Not when she watched Preston's empire collapse. She'd been composed, calculated, controlled. Until now. Now she felt like glass barely holding together. A single memory cracked her open. It was a flash, just a brief scene from a year ago. Preston kissing her forehead in the kitchen. "You're everything to me," he had said. And for a second she'd believed it. That moment, however brief, had been real to her, and that's what hurt most. The lies didn't kill her. The memories did. She doubled over on the couch, hands gripping her knees, tears sliding down her face without a sound. It wasn't sobbing. It was silent agony. That kind where your throat closes up, and your shoulders tremble, and no one is there to hold you. The loneliness was louder than any betrayal. Because now she had nothing familiar left. Not the apartment she called home for 4 years. Not the man she thought would be the father her child deserved. Not even her old name. She was becoming someone new, and that was terrifying. A knock at the door broke the silence. She froze. Quickly wiped her face. Took a breath. "Pull it together," she whispered to herself. She opened the door. It was Liam. He didn't say a word, just stepped inside, his face tight with concern. He looked down at her, then at the cold tea, the untouched food, the flickering television playing a news segment with her name in the headline. "You haven't been eating," he said quietly. She tried to deflect. "I've been, just busy." "Emily." He stepped closer, and for a second she thought she might collapse again. But not from sadness. From relief, because Liam saw through the armor, always had. "I'm tired, Liam," she whispered. He sat next to her. "You don't have to be perfect all the time." "Yes, I do," she said. "Everyone's watching. I can't afford to fall apart." "You're not falling apart," he replied. "You're human. You've carried more in the last 3 months than most people carry in a lifetime. You don't have to prove anything." Her hands trembled. "I don't know how to stop, how to just feel again." Liam reached out and gently took her hand. "Then let yourself feel it, all of it. The betrayal, the grief, the loss. You've earned the right to hurt." And that was all it took. She leaned into him, buried her face in his chest and cried. Not the quiet tears from earlier, but deep sobs that shook her entire body. The pain poured out in waves, raw and unfiltered. She grieved the life she lost, the man she trusted, the version of herself that had died somewhere between the wedding aisle and the courtroom. Liam didn't move, didn't speak. He just held her. And for the first time since everything collapsed, Emily felt safe. Not because someone was protecting her, but because someone finally saw her. When the tears stopped, she pulled back slowly. "Thank you," she said, voice hoarse. He nodded. "You don't have to thank me. Just promise me something." "What?" "When you rise again, and you will, don't forget this moment. Don't forget how it felt to be at the bottom, because it'll make the top feel real. Not just for you, but for every woman who's watching." She looked at him, eyes still red. "I'm scared." "Good," he said. "Fear means you care. Now use it." That night, Emily wrote her first real journal entry since the divorce. It didn't have bullet points or legal language or business plans. Just one sentence: "I'm still here." And that was enough. For weeks the world thought it knew the whole story. A pregnant wife publicly humiliated, a tech mogul exposed, a powerful investor stepping in. It had all the ingredients of a corporate soap opera: betrayal, revenge, redemption. But what no one knew, what Emily had never shared with anyone, not even Liam, was the secret she'd carried longer than her baby. Emily Hart wasn't just a brilliant woman wronged by a powerful man. She was a silent heiress. And she wasn't just building a comeback. She was orchestrating a takeover. It began years before anyone knew her name. Long before Preston Hale, before Hale Tech, before the wedding, Emily was simply Emily Sinclair, the only granddaughter of Thomas Sinclair, the reclusive founder of Sinclair Holdings, one of the most quietly powerful investment families in North America. Unlike other billionaires, the Sinclairs didn't crave headlines. They didn't throw parties in the Hamptons or pose for lifestyle magazines. They moved silently, acquiring, investing, and controlling more than most realized. When Thomas Sinclair passed away, most of his fortune was distributed into private trusts, strategically hidden across shell companies and offshore holdings. His 2 sons, Emily's uncles, handled most of the corporate operations. But one trust remained sealed under very specific conditions. That trust belonged to Emily, and it was locked until her 30th birthday, or until she experienced a documented, irrevocable betrayal that could threaten her health, identity, or security. It was a clause Thomas had insisted on. He had seen too many young heirs waste their lives in luxury. He wanted Emily to live in the real world, to learn, to fail, to fight for something before inheriting billions. Emily had agreed. She wanted to build her own name, not ride on her grandfather's. So she changed her last name, went off the grid, attended college under a pseudonym. Even her closest college friends didn't know who she really was. But now that trust was active, because Preston's abuse had triggered the clause. Her lawyers had confirmed it the day after the gala. The slap, the media storm, the public betrayal, all of it was enough to meet the irreversible harm threshold. And just like that, Emily Hart became the majority owner of a $3.7 billion portfolio overnight. She hadn't told Liam, not because she didn't trust him, but because this was her war. And now she had the artillery. By the time Preston was drowning in lawsuits and bad press, Emily had quietly begun acquiring controlling interest in 3 of Hale Tech's satellite vendors. She didn't use her name. She used shell firms, Sinclair style, strategic, silent, lethal. Each purchase gave her more leverage, more control, more ability to squeeze Preston out of the tech world completely. And then she made her biggest move yet. She bought the rights to the original code Preston built his empire on. The base code, a cybersecurity framework he'd once licensed from a small startup years ago, had lapsed due to unpaid royalties. Emily tracked down the startup's founder, a retired engineer in Vermont, and offered him $8 million for full rights. He said yes. And with that, she now owned the core of Hale Tech's security platform. If they used it, they owed her. If they didn't, They had no product. Liam found out during a board meeting. One of the junior partners at Devereaux Capital came rushing in with a file. "You're not going to believe this," he said, dropping the folder on the table. "Hardcore just acquired the codebase." Liam blinked. "What codebase?" "The original architecture for Hailtech's firewalls." He turned to Emily. She said nothing, just smiled. After the meeting, he pulled her aside. "How long have you been planning this?" She looked at him carefully. "Since the day he told me I was nothing without him." Liam exhaled, half in awe, half in disbelief. "You bought the floor out from under him." "I didn't buy it," she said. "I reclaimed it." That night, she revealed everything. The trust. The inheritance. Her real last name. At first, Liam was silent. Not angry. Not threatened. Just stunned. "You're a Sinclair," he said. She nodded. "I always have been, but I needed to remember who I was without the money." He stared at her. "Emily, what are you going to do now?" She looked out the window of his penthouse, the lights of Manhattan glittering below like stars. Then she turned to him with the fire of a woman reborn. "I'm going to erase him, not just from my life, but from every conversation in tech." And she meant it. The next morning, her legal team sent Hailtech a formal cease and desist letter. Any use of the code would now result in daily fines of $1.5 million. Preston panicked. He called. He begged. He left voicemails with phrases like, "You're making a mistake, and let's be reasonable." Emily forwarded every message to her lawyer and kept moving. She launched a PR campaign that focused on female founders, resilience, and second chances. She appeared on the cover of Wired, Forbes, and Inc. Her face was everywhere, but not as a victim, as a visionary. The twist was no longer that Emily survived. It was that she'd been powerful all along. The world just didn't see it. Until now. There's something powerful about reinvention. It doesn't always come with confetti or applause. Sometimes it comes in silence, in isolation, in staring into a mirror and not recognizing yourself, but choosing who you want to become. Emily Hart had reached that mirror moment. And she didn't blink. Her transformation didn't happen overnight, but it began with a single decision: to stop shrinking. For years, she kept herself small, in rooms filled with men who interrupted her, in conversations where she smiled more than she spoke, in a marriage where her worth was tied to silence and sacrifice. But after the slap, the betrayal, and the media firestorm, she wasn't interested in being palatable anymore. She was interested in being powerful, and that meant war paint. It started on a Thursday morning at 7 a.m. Emily stood in front of her bedroom mirror, hair still damp, skin still raw from restless sleep. Her old self would have gone for comfort. Loose sweaters, minimal makeup. Don't draw attention. Not anymore. She called in a stylist, not the trendy kind who dressed Instagram influencers. A woman named Marta, former military, now fashion consultant for political candidates and CEOs. Marta didn't ask what Emily wanted to wear. She asked, "What message do you want to send?" Emily didn't hesitate. "That I'm done apologizing." Marta got to work. Out went the soft colors, the ballet flats, the girlish silhouettes. In came structured suits, clean lines, power heels, and the occasional bold red lip. Each outfit was tactical, intentional. And every time Emily walked into a room, the temperature shifted. She didn't just look different, she moved different. Posture upright, chin steady, eyes forward. She started walking into investor meetings without Liam by her side, not because she didn't trust him, but because she no longer needed a buffer. She spoke clearly, confidently, unapologetically. "Here's what we're building. Here's the market gap. And here's why I don't need your money unless you want in before we triple in value." Some investors blinked, others leaned forward. But none of them looked away. They couldn't. Emily had become the kind of founder the industry whispered about, the one who had both scars and smarts, the one who'd been dragged through the mud and came out with fire in her eyes. She didn't ask for permission anymore. She took her seat, and when no seat was offered, she built her own damn table. One of her first moves as CEO of Hardcore was hiring back 3 women who had been quietly pushed out of Hailtech over the years. Engineers, data scientists, product developers, all brilliant, all burned by Preston's ego. "You're not here because I'm doing you a favor," Emily told them in their first team meeting. "You're here because we've got a war to win, and I want soldiers who know how to survive." They delivered. Within 2 months, Hardcore had secured partnerships with 5 nonprofit tech incubators and launched a beta version of their predictive AI tool. It gained over 80,000 users in the first 3 weeks. Competitors scrambled to catch up, and Preston? He was nowhere to be seen. Sources said he'd gone into hiding, rumors of therapy, medication, even rehab. But Emily didn't care. She didn't track his moves anymore. She had more important things to build. Still, she knew her transformation wouldn't be complete until she confronted the place that once stole her voice. The boardroom. Not just a boardroom. The boardroom. The Hale Tech annual shareholders meeting. It was scheduled for April 15th. Emily circled the date. She didn't plan to attend at first. Thought maybe it would be enough to let the company implode on its own. But then she saw the agenda. Buried on page 3, a motion to remove her name from all IP acknowledgments related to Hale Tech's security protocols. They were trying to erase her. She bought a new dress that day. Midnight black. No jewelry. Hair slicked back. A look that said, "I'm not here to negotiate." Liam met her outside the building. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes," she replied. "I gave him my silence once. I'm not giving him my history too." Inside the conference room, the air was thick with tension. Executives shuffled papers. A few tried not to make eye contact. Preston wasn't there, but his remaining allies were. Emily stood before them, calm as a glacier. She laid out a single document, her original patent filing, with timestamps, witnesses, and receipts that proved she'd contributed to the foundational architecture Hale Tech was built on. "This isn't about ego," she said. "It's about integrity. And if you vote to remove my name, I'll ensure every major publication knows you tried to rewrite history for the comfort of a man who abused his wife." No one argued. The motion was withdrawn. Emily walked out of the room with her head high and a silent message left behind. "I'm not done." Because transformation isn't just about revenge, it's about reclaiming your power. And Emily Hart had done more than that. She'd become untouchable. It wasn't just any gala, it was the gala. The same Bright Star Philanthropy Gala where everything fell apart 6 months earlier. Where Emily Hart had been slapped by the man she once called husband. Where humiliation burned her skin and sympathy hung in the air like cheap perfume. And now, she was going back. Not as someone's wife, not as a scandal, but as the keynote speaker. Invited, celebrated, respected. When the invitation came, Emily almost ignored it. Part of her wanted nothing to do with the place, the ballroom, the chandeliers, the people who watched her pain in silence, but part of her, the part that survived everything, knew it was the perfect full-circle moment. It wasn't revenge in the petty sense. It was justice, public, precise, and impossible to ignore. The planning started weeks in advance. Her team knew how important the moment was, and every detail had to be intentional. Her dress? Handcrafted by a designer who only worked with women rebuilding their lives post-trauma. It was sleek, silver and armor-like in its structure. No flowing fabric, no softness, just strength stitched into every seam. The makeup? Sharp. Eyes lined with the kind of precision that mirrored her state of mind. The message? "I'm not hiding anymore." The night of the event, paparazzi crowded the steps of the Langston Grand Hotel. Flashbulbs popped like fireworks. Reporters barked questions. And then silence rippled through the crowd. She arrived. Emily Hart stepped out of a black Tesla Model S, helped not by a valet, but by a partner, Liam Devereaux. Tall, silent, impeccably dressed. He didn't overshadow her. He lifted her. And when he offered his hand, she took it. Not as a damsel, but as a queen. Inside the ballroom, the energy shifted the moment she entered. Conversations paused. Glasses stopped clinking. Guests turned their heads slowly, realizing that they weren't just watching a woman. They were witnessing a storm in a dress. She didn't flinch. She made her way through the crowd with calm authority. The same room that once swallowed her in shame now opened for her like a red carpet. Some tried to smile, apologize, deflect. But she walked past them all, unapologetic, because forgiveness wasn't her burden anymore. It was theirs. Up on stage, the host cleared his throat nervously. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker for the evening, a woman of strength, innovation, and resilience, Miss Emily Hart." The applause started light, then it grew, louder, stronger. People rose to their feet, not because it was polite, not because it was expected, but because they finally saw her for what she had always been, unbreakable. She stepped to the podium, looked over the sea of faces and waited. Let the silence breathe. Let them sit in the weight of the moment. Then she spoke. 6 months ago, she began, voice steady. I stood in this room as someone's accessory. No one moved. I was pregnant, scared, and silent. I was told I didn't belong, that my voice was too much or not enough. I left this ballroom that night, humiliated, but awake. Murmurs stirred in the back. I won't waste your time with bitterness. What happened to me could have broken me, and for a while it did. But pain is a powerful teacher. So is betrayal. And here's what I learned. When someone tries to take your voice, you don't whisper. She paused. You roar. Applause erupted. She continued. I started a company in the ashes of my silence, built from vision, not vengeance, staffed by people who were once cast aside, and funded by those who believe in redemption. Liam watched from the side of the stage, proud, still. And tonight, she said, I stand before you not just as a mother-to-be, not just as a CEO, not just as the woman you all whispered about, but as a reminder. Her voice sharpened. We are not weak because we love. We are not less because we forgive. And we are never truly broken unless we decide to stay that way. The room exploded with applause. Real, thunderous, unstoppable. Emily stepped back, let the roar wash over her. And then she did something no one expected. She turned to the large projection screen behind her. Tonight, I want to dedicate something special. The screen flickered. A live satellite feed appeared. A construction site. Dusty, loud. Then, the camera panned upward. A massive banner unfurled across the side of a building. Hardcore Innovation Center. Emily Sinclair Foundation. Gasps filled the room. The Sinclair name, finally revealed. She turned back to the audience. I never wanted to lead with wealth. I wanted to lead with work. But now that my name is known, let it mean something. That no matter where you come from or what's been done to you, you can rise, and you can win. Her last words landed like a final nail in the coffin of every doubter. The lights dimmed. Her walk off stage was silent, but it said more than any standing ovation ever could. Across the ballroom, someone slipped out unnoticed. Preston Hale. He hadn't been invited. He watched from the back like a ghost. Eyes hollow, shirt wrinkled. A man who once thought he owned the world, now reduced to a cautionary tale. He left with no applause, no cameras, no legacy, just silence. Meanwhile, Emily stood at the edge of the ballroom balcony, Liam at her side, the city shimmering below. You did it, he said. She shook her head. No, she whispered. I started. In the weeks following the gala, the world couldn't stop talking about her. Every major outlet covered her speech. Clips of Emily Hart's words went viral across platforms. Teen girls quoted her on TikTok. Women reposted her message on LinkedIn. Business leaders studied her strategy. And survivors of abuse, silent for years, finally spoke out. Emily Hart had become more than a founder. She had become a movement. But she wasn't interested in fame. She was interested in impact. And that's why, one morning in early May, she sat at her desk, staring at the blinking cursor on a blank document, preparing to write the most important letter of her life. Not to an investor, not to a court, not even to her unborn child, but to every woman who had ever been made to feel small. The document would later be published in Time, Forbes, and across global media, under the headline, From Surviving to Leading, My Final Words Before I Give Birth. She began simply. I was once just a woman in a room full of powerful men, wondering how I got there, and if I was allowed to stay. Then she went deeper. People think revenge is loud, that it's fire and chaos and screaming, but real power doesn't yell. It builds, it evolves, it waits. I was humiliated, betrayed, silenced, and yet, I didn't shatter. I learned. And now, I am not writing this as someone broken. I am writing this as someone whole. The message continued. Emily detailed the early warning signs, the casual control, the subtle shaming, the way people celebrated her silence because it made them more comfortable. She wrote about the shame of staying, the guilt of leaving, the fear of speaking. And then she wrote about freedom. Freedom, she typed, doesn't come when you escape someone. It comes when you no longer need to explain why you did. She addressed women in boardrooms and women in kitchens, mothers, daughters, entrepreneurs, students, survivors. If you're reading this and waiting for permission to take back your life, this is it. No man, no partner, no institution gets to define your worth. Only you do. She ended the letter with one final truth. People ask me if I hate him. if I want him to suffer. But here's the truth. I don't think about him anymore, because I'm too busy building what he could never understand, a future that doesn't depend on fear. The letter was read by over 48 million people within the first 72 hours. And then, Emily went silent, publicly at least. She handed over day-to-day operations of Heartcore to her COO, set up an automatic out-of-office email, deleted all social apps from her phone, and prepared for her next chapter, not in business, in life. One summer morning, as sunlight spilled across the quiet hospital suite, Emily gave birth to a baby girl. No cameras, no announcements, no press, just a soft cry, a heartbeat, a new beginning. She named her daughter Grace, not because life had been graceful, but because she had survived it with grace. When Liam walked in, holding flowers and teary-eyed from pacing the waiting room, she handed him the tiny swaddled bundle and whispered, "We're finally here." He nodded, words caught in his throat. Outside, the world continued turning. Preston Hale had faded from the spotlight completely. No interviews, no comeback, just a few obscure legal filings and a name that had become synonymous with downfall. His company was eventually acquired for pennies on the dollar. No one missed him. But Emily? She was far from gone. Months later, she returned to the stage, but not as a victim or even a CEO. This time, it was to open the Grace Center for Women in Leadership, a nonprofit dedicated to funding female-led startups, protecting survivors of workplace abuse, and offering legal aid to women in toxic corporate environments. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, she stood with Grace in her arms and said, "This center isn't just a building. It's a warning. That women remember, that we rebuild, and when we do, we bring others with us." Thunderous applause, tears, smiles, hope. Years from now, they would say that Emily Hart changed the way the world viewed power, that she proved strength could be quiet, that revenge could be radiant, that survival wasn't the end, it was the beginning of legacy. She was never just a wife. She was never just a victim. She was never meant to stay small. She was meant to lead. And to every woman still waiting for the courage to leave, to fight, to rise, her story whispered one last message: you are not too late, you are not too weak, and you are never, ever alone. Maybe this story has come to an end, but I don't just want to say goodbye. I want to leave you with something small, a keyword, a sentence that, who knows, might be the beginning of an entirely new chapter in your life. I reclaimed my worth. Because you know what? Those of us who've been betrayed, ignored, pushed out of our own lives, we don't need to disappear. We just need to reclaim our worth. Quietly, intentionally, powerfully. I want you to write it down in the comments, not for me, but for you. I reclaimed my worth. Write it, look at it, feel it, and trust me. The moment you put those words out there, the universe starts to move in your favor. The moment you admit, "I deserve to own my life again," that's the exact moment your new chapter begins. And here's the truth. That phrase, "I reclaimed my worth," isn't just for you. It's for so many others out there who need to hear it today. Maybe you will be the one to inspire them, just by leaving one powerful comment. So if you saw yourself in this story, if you felt seen, heard, understood, then I invite you to do two things. Leave that comment and hit the subscribe button. Because here, I don't tell stories to teach you how to live. I tell them so you'll remember one thing. You are not alone, and you deserve a new chapter, one filled with power, freedom, and light.